define the current world order?
So the current order can be called a new Cold War era, which is characterized by two major power centers, China and the US.
How do you see S. Jaishankar's role in India's diplomacy?
He's like the voice of the nation on the world stage. He's taking India to the world, but he's also bringing the world to India.
I think the part we are waiting for is the return of the stolen part of Kashmir, which is on the under illegal Pakistani occupation. When that's done, I assure you, Kashmir solved.
Coming to United Nations, do you think that it still holds any relevance in the current world order?
Presently, the major powers don't agree with each other. So Security Council is unable to perform the basic functions.
अगर ऐसा long term में चलता रहा, and not listening to UN, then what will happen next?
Total collapse and world war.
Do you think that Russia will come to the rescue of India?
रूस की चीन पर निर्भरता बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ गई है, तो इसके कारण चिंताएं तो हैं.
बीच में ऐसा लगता रहा है कि ये जो बैलेंस्ड अप्रोच चल रहा है ये थोड़ा सा बैकफायर कर सकता है फ्रॉम द यूएस.
After the Ukraine war, the pressure from the US was tremendous that we should join the sanctions against Russia, or we should stop buying weapons, stop buying oil.
Do you think that India is really a superpower? Tariffs have become a new geopolitical tool. How India can benefit out of it? नमस्कार दोस्तों, वेलकम टू OD.Podcast. आज का ये एपिसोड बहुत ही ज़बरदस्त होने वाला है क्योंकि हमारे साथ जो जुड़ने वाले हैं वो हमें बताएंगे ब्लैक एंड वाइट और ग्रे एरियाज. किसके बारे में? जियोपॉलिटिक्स के बारे में. अगर आपको जियोपॉलिटिक्स में थोड़ा सा भी इंटरेस्ट है, अगर आप ये जानना चाहते हैं कि वाकई में क्या इंडिया और रशिया के रिलेशंस इतने अच्छे हैं, क्या वाकई में जब इंडिया रशिया के पोजीशन में होगा किसी कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में तो क्या रशिया उसकी मदद करेगा, ये जवाब आपको यहाँ पे मिलने वाला है. इफ यू रियली थिंक कि बांग्लादेश में जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हो रहा है उसको इंडिया कैसे डील करे, चाइना और यूएस के बीच जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट चल रहा है, जो इकोनॉमिक वॉर्स चल रहे हैं, उसमें इंडिया कैसे बेनिफिट ले सकते हैं, ये सारे सवालों के जवाब जो है ना आपको स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड यहीं पे मिलेंगे. आज हमारे साथ जुड़ने वाले हैं इंडिया वन ऑफ द मोस्ट वोकल वॉइसेस ऑन फॉरेन पॉलिसी, जो कि इसको अलग नजरिए से देखते हैं, श्रीराम चौलिया जी, हु ऑल्सो रन्स ए शो ऑन दूरदर्शन व्हिच इज कॉल्ड इंडियन डिप्लोमेसी. इंडियन डिप्लोमेसी के बारे में जानेंगे, इंडिया के फॉरेन अफेयर्स के बारे में जानेंगे और बहुत सारे सवालों के जवाब आज आपको मिलेगा इस एपिसोड में, ओडी पॉडकास्ट में. बहुत सारे लोग हैं जो आते हैं, एपिसोड्स देखते हैं, बट दे डोंट सब्सक्राइब. बट मैं आपसे अनुरोध करूंगा, आई विल रिक्वेस्ट यू, सब्सक्राइब कीजिए. बहुत अमेजिंग एपिसोड्स आगे आने वाले हैं, यू विल एंजॉय इट. आपको बहुत सारा कंटेंट यहां से मिलने वाला है. डू वॉच दिस एपिसोड, डू सब्सक्राइब, एंजॉय द शो. हाय श्रीराम सर, वेलकम टू ओडी पॉडकास्ट.
Thank you. It's my honor to be on your show.
इट्स आवर प्लेजर एक्चुअली, क्योंकि जब हम लोग बातें करते हैं फॉरेन पॉलिसी को लेके तो मुझे लगता है कि जिस तरह से आम आदमी जिस तरह से देखता है कि क्या चल रहा है पूरी दुनिया में, जिस तरह से आप इसको देखते हैं, दोनों में अलग एक नजरिया है. एंड वी आर फॉर्चुनेट इनफ दैट वी आर हैविंग यू टुडे ऑन ओडी पॉडकास्ट टू टॉक अबाउट इंडियाज फॉरेन पॉलिसी एंड व्हाट इज गोइंग ऑन ग्लोबली. किस तरह से जो चीज़ें चल रही हैं उसके बारे में थोड़ा डिटेल में बात करेंगे एंड यू विल गिव इनसाइट जो हमारे व्यूअर्स हैं कि क्या चल रहा है एंड किस तरह से वो इन चीज़ों को देखें. So I'll start with, there are multiple segments that we have, we will cover in this entire podcast episode. But let's start wide. आप किस तरह से देखते हैं? How do you define the current world order?
The post-Cold War era has ended. So the current order can be called a new Cold War era, which is characterized by two major power centers, China and the US, which are clashing and are competing for influence in different parts of the world. It's different from the original Cold War, but this is the easiest, big picture frame in which we can analyze the world today, that there is a new Cold War. And it's has many ramifications and manifestations. But essentially, that is one way of understanding what kind of order it is, some people call it disorder or even anarchy, meaning there just isn't any rules-based system left anymore. But I think through praxis, through the actual conduct of international relations, slowly we will have a new order, which is, I think, going to be largely defined by this frame of the new Cold War.
So let's talk about India's role in the foreign relation. We talk about S. Jaishankar a lot. We see a lot of reels, we see a lot of videos where he's dealing with the foreign diplomats and foreign media. So how do you see S. Jaishankar's role in India's diplomacy?
Well, he has actually articulated our interests both to foreign counterparts and to governments and ministries, and also to the general public in a way that was not the case before, no? So I would call him like a And he has also been, I have characterized his style as counterpunch diplomacy, wherein, he doesn't mince any words when it comes to pushing back at negative stereotyping and attempts to paint India as the spoiler or as a country that is not contributing to global good. So in that sense, he is a very, he's like the voice of the nation on the world stage, and somebody who's been able to get through to a lot of, so some of our soft power, as we call it, is because of Dr. Jaishankar. Some of it is simply because he is able to convince so many audiences, and he does a lot of public engagement, So he's very different from the traditional foreign ministers who would just, meet with their peers, sign documents and, issue statements. So he has a way of emoting in India, of course, with the young people, with audiences of all, hues and shades. He is able to give them a sense that foreign affairs is important and that everybody must take it seriously. So he is taking India to the world, but he's also bringing the world to India by constant engagement and negotiations and talks and dialogues with his counterparts. So I think, if I'm not wrong, at least like 20 days of the month in any given year, he's overseas because he's continuously building those relationships, maintaining the partnerships and, furthering the national interests. So I think he's a very committed individual, but who has also, the gift of the gab and who's able to, do the articulation well. Without articulation, people may think that India's position is not so clear on this matter or that matter. But he really makes sure he's got the right words, the right phrases at the right time. So that is a rare ability that we have in a foreign minister, and we are fortunate to have him.
You mentioned about how he articulates his statements in his foreign visits. So, agar short mein isko kahe, to kind of he has made the general public believe that yes, India is a superpower. But now talk about the facts. Do you think that India is really a superpower, or it is a middle power just like the Brazil or maybe Turkey?
See, some years ago I wrote a book called Trumped: Emerging Powers in a Post-American World, and I included India alongside Brazil, alongside Turkey, alongside Nigeria, alongside Indonesia and a few others who are generally classified as middle powers. But my latest book, Friends, which may be of interest to your viewers, this one actually makes an argument that India is now a rising power that is above the category of middle power. But it is not yet a great power, meaning or a superpower, which is currently by consensus, only China and the US have that status. So we will need to grow at a much faster pace in a sustained way over the next maybe 10-15 years before we can probably leapfrog into that category of great powers. So at present I would call it a rising power, and we also have a terminology of our own. We call Narendra Modi era, we are calling our identity in the world as leading power. Leading power is different, not necessarily great power or superpower. It means that we have our own ethos and philosophy of what power is and how we should use it in the world, coming from our own traditions and our own statecraft, like Kautilya and Kamandaka and Shukra and all these things, our epics, Mahabharata, Ramayana.
Correct.
So leading power is more like providing leadership to solve global problems. I think that is how we are trying to position ourselves. But no longer a middle power, because middle powers generally do not have not all of them have the acumen or the capacity to become a great power. India has it. We have the potential. I would say we are a would-be great power.
Let's talk about the United Nations. And I think you are the perfect person to speak about it, where you have seen, what you are seeing in depth. I don't think anyone of us are seeing like that. United Nations, एक time था जब वहाँ पे सारे powerful countries are there, everyone is there. United Nations की सुनते थे. Now coming to United Nations, do you think that it still hold any relevance in the current world order?
No, definitely वर्तमान काल में संयुक्त राष्ट्र कमज़ोर हैं, और इसका कारण ये भी है क्योंकि संयुक्त राष्ट्र अपने आप में उसकी अपनी कोई सेना नहीं है, अपने आप में उसकी कोई अस्मिता नहीं है, बजाय कि उसके जो मेंबर्स हैं, तो मेंबर स्टेट्स ultimately, and the equations among the member states ultimately determine how strong or weak the UN can be. So presently you have this deadlock. Like I said, there is a new Cold War, right? The major powers don't agree with each other. So Security Council is unable to perform the basic functions. So if you see all the major wars last 10-15 years, the war in Syria, the war in Yemen, the ongoing wars in Ukraine, in the Palestinian territories, all these, the Security Council is paralyzed because Russia and China are unwilling to go along with the US, Britain and France. So one is deadlock. The second is the membership of the council has not expanded and it is still frozen. And वो 75 वर्ष पहले जैसे उसकी हालत थी वो आज भी ऐसा ही है, कुछ बदला नहीं है. So people are also frustrated. All these rising powers that I'm talking about don't have enough representation there. So कभी कभार 10 साल में कभी हमें नॉन परमानेंट सीट 1-2 साल का मिल रहा है. Permanent seat we have not gotten. There are other contenders also. Brazil has not made it. Germany has not made it. Japan has not made it. All worthy candidates like India, but we are just not getting. There's no African member. So, and the process is frozen. So I think the UN is struggling for relevance due to both these reasons. Functionally, the polarization is preventing it from from delivering on core peace and security issues. And in terms of representation, it is not democratic enough. So on both the counts, in terms of implementation of the UN Charter and in terms of expanding the, and being more inclusive, the UN is struggling. So that's why we are all trying to find some, workarounds. For example, G20, we had a very successful leadership, 2023. These are other new institutions that have emerged. They are not so big and universal like the UN, but at least they solve problems, and at least these emerging and rising powers and middle powers have got more voice there. So I think our hope is to focus more on these alternatives now. And of course, we are active in the UN. Of course, we'll continue to try and shape the agenda, but not high hopes. I mean, it's not going to be like the catharsis that will solve problems.
From a general public's point of view, like I'm a normal person, what I'm seeing UN right now and what I'm thinking, a hypothetical question it may be, but how do you see it? Let's say, like you said, the great superpowers are not willing with each other, but working with each other. So how are you seeing it? Agar aisa long term mein chalta raha, that the powers are not listening to each other, they're not listening to UN, then what will happen next?
That is part of the disorder or the anarchy we are speaking about, the world order, or in this new Cold War period. Multilateral institutions are weak and will remain weak. So what is going to happen is people are forming smaller clubs or groupings.
Like BRICS?
Like BRICS, like G20, and there's so many others,
Does BRICS have any relevancy right now?
Yeah, see, BRICS, we are founding members, but now there is an expansion with 6 new members coming in, and many more want to come in. So suddenly the BRICS now looks like a bigger, and a more genuinely multilateral institution than just what used to be called a small minilateral, which is like just 5 countries. So with 11 members and maybe more coming in, it may definitely have a higher resonance in the global corridors than was the case before. So you will see, people moving around these defunct or, जो संस्थान अपने जो कार्य प्रणाली में कमज़ोर पड़ गए हैं, उन्हें छोड़कर ना आगे निकलने की कोशिश में नए कोई ना कोई आविष्कार होते रहेंगे इस प्रकार के. So new innovations and institutions will come up. बिना institutions के तो कुछ भी नहीं. Then you will have like total collapse and world war all over the place. Some institution or the other is there to fill the vacuum, but not a big universal one like the UN or World Trade Organization. That's another one that has completely failed with the trade war that has been unleashed. The WTO has been buried. It used to be the so-called maintainer of the global trading system. Now it has been completely bypassed by the US and so many others now in retaliation. So you can see the UN, WTO, इस प्रकार के जो बड़े वैश्विक जो संस्थान थे, उनकी साख बहुत कमज़ोर पड़ गई हैं. तो आगे जाकर आप देखेंगे छोटे छोटे ये जो क्लब्स हैं, इन्हीं के माध्यम से विश्व व्यवस्था या अव्यवस्था जो भी आप कहें वो कायम रहेगी.
Let's talk about Russia. एक बहुत दिन से इंडियंस का जो सेंटिमेंट है फॉर द रशियंस, देयर प्रो रशियंस. कुछ भी होता है तो इंडियंस वर लाइक स्टैंड विद रशिया. जबकि फॉरेन रिलेशन में बहुत सारी डिप्लोमेटिक चीज़ें होती हैं, हम लोग डायरेक्टली सपोर्ट नहीं कर सकते. लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स हैपन. Do you think that is it true or it might become true? Do you think that India will, Russia will come to the rescue of India if something will happen with India similar to what happened with Russia?
रूस की चीन पर निर्भरता बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ गई है, तो इसके कारण चिंताएं तो हैं, हमें चिंताएं हैं. Suppose there is a conflict with China, as you know, we have resolved a long simmering border dispute only recently after more than 3 years of standoff, 4 years actually of standoff. So now the question is, will Russia continue to give us the defense equipment and the subsidized oil and other forms of diplomatic support if we have a collision again with China? This is the biggest question mark, and there is no consensus view on whether it will happen. Russia still wants to be autonomous from China, but in terms of its economy, which Russian economy is in shambles, it's not even hardly $2 trillion. It's weakening. So it increasingly is relying on China because of the Western sanctions. Now, if there is an end to the Ukraine war and if the Western sanctions are lifted on Russia, then maybe you can think about Russia trying to diversify. Right now, it doesn't have many partners. China is a partner, India is a partner, but China is a much bigger partner for them in terms of the trade, in terms of the dual-use technology, in terms of military cooperation, all these things. So I think they need China to counterbalance the US and to a lesser extent Europe, So I think that is where the reliability of Russia for us there is a question mark. You are right that sentimentally and historically, even at the level of the leadership, like even today, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gets along very well with President Vladimir Putin. But like I said, if push comes to shove and if Putin has to make a choice between Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi, he will always opt for Xi Jinping because that is his lifeline, that is his means for survival. So the Russians would like that India and China, all get along. The Russian foreign minister has often said, Sergei Lavrov, China and India are two best friends and we want all of them to get along. But the reality is we cannot easily get along with China because not only due to the border dispute, but there's so much competition. We are two different models of Asian power, and they are trying to erode our influence and to check our rise. So Russia, China, India एक ज़माने में एक त्रिकोणीय एक समीकरण बना था, RIC, Russia, India, China.
That was in the year?
In the 90s. Okay. In the 90s, almost 30 years ago. Yevgeny Primakovic थे at that time. At that time, चीन के साथ हमारी उतनी अनबन नहीं थी. But now last 10 years under Xi Jinping, it's become much more harsher. So I think that RIC का जो सपना है, वो एक सपना ही रहेगा क्योंकि चीन के साथ हमारी बन नहीं रही है. तो रूस चाहता है कि हम तीनों एक मिलकर एकजुट होकर पश्चिम के खिलाफ एक मोर्चा खड़ा करें. बट आई डोंट थिंक दैट्स प्रैक्टिकल. एंड सो देयर आर लिमिट, बेसिकली मैं ये कह रहा हूँ कि देयर आर लिमिटेशंस टू रशिया इंडिया पार्टनरशिप. अभी भी पार्टनरशिप है. मेरे किताब में अगर आप देखें तो रशिया इज स्टिल देयर. इट इज स्टिल फीचर्ड एज वन ऑफ आवर टॉप 7 स्ट्रेटेजिक पार्टनर्स. बट टॉप मोस्ट या नंबर 1 पार्टनर तो नहीं कहूँगा मैं.
Because India has maintained a balanced approach towards Russia and United States, or maybe the Western countries, अगर मैं कहूँ, is this pragmatic diplomacy or a tightrope that could backfire India? क्योंकि बीच-बीच में ऐसा लगता रहा है कि हो सकता है कि ये जो balanced approach चल रहा है ये थोड़ा सा backfire कर सकता है from the US, especially from the...
Correct. After the Ukraine war, for example, the pressure from the US was tremendous that we should join the sanctions against Russia, or we should stop buying weapons, stop buying oil, all these things. But we resisted that pressure and we convinced the US that actually it's not so easy कि overnight we can just सारे रिश्ते तोड़कर हम रूस को दरकिनार कर दें. It's not possible. So we have convinced them that for some, especially the Indian Army, less the Air Force and less so the Navy, but the Army still relies significantly for many of its legacy systems on Russian spares and Russian weaponry and all these things, So I think the US has understood. So in that sense, we have managed to, eat the Russian pie and have the American cake, as I say in the book, We have managed to do that, but it will require a lot of skill going into the future because now there's potentially a rapprochement between the US and Russia. और अगर ऐसा होता है तो we would welcome it because we don't want us to be forced to choose between this side or that side.
And talking about Indian foreign policy, we talk a lot about the neighborhood first. We talk about the East. India talks about कि East में जो countries है उसके बारे में हम लोग बात करते हैं. Now talking about India's neighbor, we don't have good relation with Bangladesh. Our relations seem like falling with Nepal. We don't have good relation with Pakistan. We don't have that good relationship with Afghanistan. So अगर हमारी foreign policy को देखें और हमारे neighbors को देखें तो लगता है कि India is the only country that it is working itself. It doesn't have any good or strong relationship कि लगे कि कहीं पर अगर कुछ conflict हो, then these are the countries which will come forward for India. So how do you see it?
See, इसमें देखिए one has to take a medium to long term view. Geography is a given, उसे बदला नहीं जा सकता है, भूगोल है, जो पड़ोसी है वो हमेशा पड़ोसी रहेंगे ना. बट उसमें क्या हुआ, उनके जो अंदरूनी जो राजनीति हैं उसमें उथल पुथल होते रहते हैं every few years. So in a lot of these countries, suppose there's a regime change, suppose a new set of people win an election or something like that, then you hear like this so-called anti-India sentiment is growing, or the anti-India factions are gaining power and they are opposing our interests. But then again over time वो फिर बदलता है. आप नेपाल का for example, I'll give one example. अच्छा, जब communists and the Maoists are in power in Nepal, ऐसा लगता है कि चीन का पलड़ा वहाँ पे भारी हो रहा है और भारत वहाँ से जैसे भारत को हटाया जा रहा है. But then when the Nepali Congress comes in or enters a coalition which is more pro-India, then it looks like China is losing and our influence is growing. Same in Sri Lanka, same in Maldives. Bangladesh, we had like 15 years of Sheikh Hasina, तो हमें लग रहा था कि we have the eastern flank is stable. But now with this sudden regime change and all that, it has become a major issue. So what are we doing? We are not sitting back and simply saying that, okay, whoever wants to do whatever, unko rehne dein. That is, the Americans used to call it the Sinatra doctrine, like after Frank Sinatra, saying, just do it your way kind of thing. But now what we are trying to do is engage with all these countries, chahe jaise bhi sarkar wahan ho, to make sure that they realize that India is, indispensable. Without India, first of all, India is a lifeline for the economy and the commerce and the transit and the access to most of these countries. So, and India has done a lot of, grassroots development works in these countries as part of our foreign assistance, So we have all this extensive portfolio with which we can influence these countries. And ऐसा नहीं है कि the whole thing is, lost. I mean, sometimes media में headlines ऐसा आता है कि एक सरकार बदल गई तो, but then I'll give another example, like Maldives. Maldives में जब भी there was a previous government that was seen as pro-India, फिर election हुए, फिर then they said नहीं ये pro-China and anti-India.
Correct.
Then Muizu, the current Maldivian president,
India out movement चल रहा था वहाँ पे.
India out, they all promoted that.
Yeah.
And then reality hit. China was not bailing them out or giving them the finances that they needed, So Muizu chastened, came back to India, and now we have again normalized relations. So what I'm saying is, we will compete with the Chinese because the Chinese want to encircle us and surround us and to weaken our sphere of influence and not to allow us to rise to become that leading power or the rising power or the great power. So unki long-term strategy hai to try and keep India hemmed in the neighborhood. As far as Pakistan, Afghanistan go, Pakistan for ideological reasons, as you know, we usually write it off. We never had influence there. Afghanistan, we are a silent recovery is happening. जो media headlines में आप नहीं देखते हैं. We have reopened our embassy there. Our projects are running again. Our technicians and engineers and so on are back on the ground. And touch wood, so far, Taliban have kept their part of the bargain that no harm will be done to Indian officials and workers there. So slowly, and we have got a lot of managerial capacities. We can provide foreign assistance. We can tie up with other countries like Japan and US and do something because that country is in very dire straits. So, and Afghanistan, Pakistan, the so-called strategic depth theory has now fallen apart because they are having major clashes. So the idea that Pakistan can control Afghanistan now because Taliban is in power in Afghanistan has not worked out. So there are a lot of reasons why Taliban want to now distance themselves from Pakistan and come to India. So slowly, through statecraft, वो चाणक्य नीति जो हम कहते हैं, चाणक्य नीति is my enemy's enemy is my friend.
Correct.
It's one of the core concepts of Arthashastra. So we have that ability and we are going to continue. Dr. Jaishankar, his team and many others, Mr. Ajit Doval, National Security Advisor, they are heavily involved in these things. What's happening in the neighborhood, we would still want to shape it in a way where India is the center with high economic growth, prosperity, big market, in which all the other smaller neighbors can benefit and we can lift all of them together. So that is our liberal vision for the region, and I am sure ultimately it will be upheld.
Correct. But talking about especially Bangladesh, what is going on right now, the Hindu massacre is going on, then there's an anti-Hindu and anti-India sentiment is going on. How do you see what India should do to deal with Bangladesh?
See, I would characterize our response as a bit of carrot and stick. On one hand, we are willing to support with them with their developmental agenda and with all the works that we have done.
Still, what's going on beside that?
In spite of that, the connectivity and all those are there, right? We would like, a normal. At one point, Bangladesh became a major trading partner of India. I think during the pandemic, I saw data 2021, 2020. Around that time, it became a fifth largest trading partner. We had never had that with a neighboring country before. So we would want those things to be sustained. So what we are telling them is, you want to share in the prosperity of India, then you need to also respect our sensibilities. And as far as the China factor goes or the Pakistan factor, yes, they are going to try and play that, the new regime, because they feel the previous regime was too pro-India. Now they need to correct the imbalance. That is how they project it. So let it settle down. Like I said, Bangladesh, in terms of its access to the world markets, in terms of its ability to manufacture, in terms of its energy, all these things, is not that they can just dispense with India and still go ahead. So I would say, culturally, our West Bengal and Bangladesh have strong linguistic and cultural links, right? So those things we have, and we are going to play on those. I think in the long run, we have to see what will happen after the interim administration. They have not yet called elections. Once elections happen, we will work with whoever wins, but we will have to, draw the lines. So if it's becoming very inimical to our interests, there are ways in which we can also hurt Bangladesh, But generally, we don't do such thing because we are a generous neighbor.
Yeah, I want to know about those things that we can do to, we never meant to hurt Bangladesh, but we can do to, give a reality check to Bangladesh. That these are the things that can happen. What are those things?
Like I said, there's a strong economic relationship. There's an energy relationship. We were supposed to be part of a BBIN corridor, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, Nepal. These four, for connectivity, especially for the Himalayan states, the landlocked countries, to reach the Bay of Bengal and to reach oceanic commerce. And Bangladesh had already been strengthening links with these smaller South Asian neighbors and all that. So there are all these opportunities, that Bangladesh knows if they apply rational economic sense. So even their garment sector, Trump has slammed them with, enormous tariffs. So our garment sector will actually benefit more from it. So we would not ideally want to compete with Bangladesh on these matters, We'd want to cooperate and work it out with them. So their long-term economic growth and even their social fabric very much depends on, following the democratic model of India and working with a large, major economy like India. So I think we will try to impress upon them. And, quote-unquote punitive measures, look, end of the day, if they bring in Pakistani military and if they start arming jihadist groups and if they start fueling, this fire of Islamist extremism in our eastern borders and all that, we have a very capable military actually, if required, to even intervene inside Bangladesh. If there are, suppose they again bring Alpha and, other jihadi camps and start Huji. These were the groups that used to exist. That under Sheikh Hasina's regime, we broke them, So if these groups, anti-India groups, are being given haven there, safe haven, we will reserve the right for hot pursuit and, things like surgical strikes and so on. So I think those are there, but they don't need to be put out there. I'm sure we are conveying it to them to be mindful of our red lines.
Tariffs have become a new geopolitical tool. And it's been said that the World War III has already started without firing a bullet. So how do you see what's going on between US and China and how India can benefit out of it?
Yeah, economic warfare has come back in a big way, along with the geopolitical tussle. And you see a lot of, upheaval now with the like I said, the WTO system has been dismantled. So we have to actually enter into bilateral negotiations with the US, and that's what we are doing, to try and strike a deal with them. I'm fairly confident that this 26% tariff that they have imposed on us, over and above a baseline tariff of 10%, we will be able to lift by giving some concessions for US exporters in our market. It will be a give and take. We will settle that. How can we take advantage of this as a whole? Well, with 145% tariffs on China, who will want to manufacture there anymore? So people will want to move out and manufacture in countries which have lesser tariff lines with the US, right? So that is our
Sreeram,
big...
sir, if you can tell me about, because the general audience will be watching it, if you can tell me about what happened when a country like US put such a big tariff on another country, what usually happens from a general public's point of view?
So suppose you are manufacturing in a country X and that country has been imposed 145% tariffs, China. So China is a big exporter to the US market historically. They've had 600, 700 billion or more annual trade. Now, every item that is manufactured in China and shipped to the United States will basically cost almost double or more than that, right? It will become uncompetitive. So what do you do as a manufacturer? Will you continue staying in China and manufacture it? Yeah, yes, if you are exporting to other markets, like the EU has not imposed massive tariffs on China yet. ASEAN countries have not yet imposed massive tariffs on China. They have some trade dispute. So China is trying to diversify and sell to other countries now, not to the US. But for Western companies, which are already American, for example, which invested so much in China, Trump is trying to bring them back to the US or push them out of China at least. Trump's long-term goal seems to be that to bring back manufacturing to the US and to compete with China, because the share of China's share of manufacturing, global manufacturing, is almost double that of the US. So to bring factories and industries back. So I think there is a chance that this so-called friendshoring or nearshoring and other things will happen. The offshoring model where Western capital used to go and finance the industrialization of China, that era is over now. They are looking to decouple. So I think we have a chance to attract it, but of course we have to do a lot of domestic reforms. Our inward FDI flows have to increase. We need to get at least $100 billion or $150 billion a year of inward FDI. And only then can we really, our own manufacturing can grow and our own economy can, have double-digit growth, 10% or more, no? 6-7% is good, but is still not driven heavily by manufacturing.
But currently FDIs are moving out of India, we are seeing.
Investors see, because of some of it, those are not manufacturers, those are like institutional investors, foreign FIIs, who invest in the stock markets, and then, if the dollar becomes stronger, if the gold becomes stronger, they leave these emerging markets and go to those safe havens. But manufacturing, we will need to attract a lot more. There is no big exodus, but there was a dip in the last couple of years. So we are expecting it to cross 100 billion, and then, we will be able to fulfill our long-term economic growth plans. So China's pain can be our gain, but we need to do a lot of internal reforms for it to happen.
In a world of economic sanctions, we are talking about what is happening. Usually हम लोग जो वर्ल्ड वॉर की बातें करते हैं, हम लोग अलाइनमेंट की बातें करते हैं, कौन से कंट्री किस साइड में है. But talking about this economic controversy that is going on right now, do you think that a country like India can align with somebody, or it should have its own policies?
In geopolitics, it's clear. We will align with the US only. We will always be aligning with the US because...
We are talking about economical.
Yeah. So, no, in political sense, in strategic, in military terms, Indo-Pacific, we will always be aligning with the US because China is challenging our rise. In economic terms, I think we have a more diversified strategy. China is also a major trading partner of India. After the US, after the EU, the China also comes in. It's in the top 3, depending on goods or services, or how you measure it. So I don't think that we can rely only on a single country per se for our economic rise. Like that, our trade basket, our investment flows come from different sides. For example, Gulf countries are very significant for us. It's not only Europe or the US, because there's a lot of capital coming in. Prime Minister has invested a lot of energy in cultivating United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and all these countries, because they have huge sovereign wealth funds, and they're committing to invest here. So I would say we may need, at least 10 pillars, different sides, East Asia we have, then West Asia we have, and Europe and North America, and even with Africa, Latin America, the developing world, our trade relations are growing, our investment ties are increasing in number. So I think overall, because there are sectors of the Indian economy, for example, IT is more oriented towards the North American market, right? But the other sectors which will look to Africa, for example, automobiles, like Bajaj scooter or auto rickshaw will sell in Nigeria or in South Africa or in Mozambique, but it will not sell in Poland or France or in Canada, right? So I would say it should be a diversified strategy in terms of foreign relations. And of course, like I said, domestic economic reforms, without them, always we will struggle.
Alignment, like you said, India will always be, standing with the US in terms of, generally in the global politics. But do you think that we are living through the fall of American dominance? जो पहले होता था, countries are not listening, countries are, pushing back to America. Do you think that is happening? And what's going on in America is just witnessing a clever pivot, if you can say?
हाँ, ये तो है. I mean, like I said, I wrote a book called The Post-American World 5-6 years ago. There is a lack of credibility of the US because 2016 से अब तक आप देखें 3 सरकारें आई हैं, Trump, Biden and again Trump. So there's like a lot of volatility. उससे पहले आप 1992 से 2016 का अगर आप वो अरसा देखें तो हर अमेरिकी राष्ट्रपति के 8 साल के मतलब 2 दफ़े वो चुने जाते थे, 2 टर्म्स हुआ करते थे. Now it's like every 4 years it's flipping. So what it means is people and then each new incoming administration completely reverses the policies of the previous one. There's very less continuity. So as a result of it, the US's credibility or reliability or dependability has declined. So earlier people used to think, acha, ye America, it stands for these positions. It will always, defend certain countries. It will always support allies. It will always support partners. But now it's not so. So it's more transactional and less strategic. So I think as a result of it, definitely many countries will think twice about putting all the eggs in the American basket. US will still be important because a $28 trillion economy is still a huge, it's a great power. But it's not the only great power. China bhi hai, there's a second great power. The rising powers like India. So in this multipolar era, where 3, 4, 5, 6 हो सकता है कि 10-15 सालों में आप देखेंगे there Indonesia है, you may see like 5 or 6 great powers, not just 1 or 2. So as a result of which, you will probably see America's relative importance declining. It will still be a great power. I don't see it anytime in the near future कि falling. जैसे रूस का बहुत बड़ा सोवियत संघ महाशक्ति था, उसके बाद मध्यम शक्ति बन गया. वैसा तो ऐसी कोई गिरावट तो अमेरिका में आएगी नहीं, शक्ति में नहीं गिरावट आएगी, लेकिन उसकी जो विश्वसनीयता, जो कहते हैं ना, reliability, credibility, that is taken a big beating.
Do you think is China playing a long game that the West still does not understand?
Yeah, there is an advisor of Trump called Michael Pillsbury. He wrote a book called 100-Year Marathon, where he said that we have to understand China in terms of they have a long-term strategy of dominating the world and of remaking the international order, creating a new Sino-centric institutions and all these things, and ultimately imposing their understanding of governance and rules and conduct on the whole world. And there are many who have been warning that the West was complacent, and for a long time they thought, okay, कौन सी बड़ी बात है, they are also became capitalist, and हमारे जो पूंजीपति हैं सब जाकर वहाँ पे निवेश कर रहे हैं. चीन is a big economic opportunity, पैसा बना रहे हैं सब business, Western companies. But now I think like I said, the decoupling is happening. So I think people are now waking up to the reality that China was never going to become a liberal country, never going to become a democracy. It was never going to become another America. Uski apni, the Communist Party is actually consolidating power. It's not loosening or weakening power. So, and especially under Xi Jinping, एक pro तानाशाही तो है ही, but एक kind of like what we call authoritarian से भी बढ़कर totalitarian, उस तरह की regime बन गई है चीन. So I think now people are waking up to the danger that it poses, and I think more people are now alert and suspicious. It started with the coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic, which emanated from China, and you see that a lot of people are very conscious that whatever they say or do, उसके पीछे मकसद कुछ और हो सकता है. So to that extent, I would say if अमेरिका की छवि अगर खराब है, तो चीन की कोई अच्छी नहीं है. In many parts of the world, people actually fear or even detest China. So I think there is also a backlash against Chinese dominance. दैट्स व्हाट आई एम सेइंग कि मल्टीपोलर का क्या मतलब है, 5-6 शक्ति केंद्र कैसे बनेंगे जब टॉप 2 जो हैं उनकी देयर अट्रैक्टिवनेस, देयर अट्रैक्शन, उनके प्रति जो आकर्षण है वो जब कम होता जाएगा, तो आई सी स्लोली द वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर विल बिकम more democratized. It's a dangerous period, this new Cold War period, but ultimately we may settle with 5 or 6 power centers, and which are all balanced, and that is also our objective. We keep saying that our long-term goal is a multipolar world order with a reformed multilateralism. So hopefully we can accomplish those by avoiding war. But ये जो transition period है अभी, जो this new era that we are talking about, disorder वाला, it can be dangerous, it can lead to wars. We are already seeing a lot of wars in many parts of the world. So India would like to avoid war and navigate this tricky period so that 10-15 years down the line we emerge as one of the top 3 and one of the great powers in the world.
Talking about China's dominance, you mentioned about how it, the smaller countries, I'm especially talking about the smaller countries. How do you see that, what they should do in this Cold War and in this economic war, if we can say? Because I think, it gets difficult for the smaller nations to survive in these kind of scenarios, and they have to align with somebody to get benefited. So how do you see it?
So definitely smaller states, see middle powers, rising powers, we can manage it because we have more resources and capabilities. But if you are very small, if you are, let's say, Sri Lanka or a Rwanda or a Chile, आप क्या करेंगे? You are under pressure from both sides. Chinese भी हैं, Americans भी हैं, and in some parts of the world even Russia भी, although Russia is no longer a great power. So what do? I mean, ideally you would want to play off all the sides and get benefits from all of them and just survive. Small power का वही goal होता है, survival. Correct. Small power can never become a superpower.
Great power, correct.
So how do you? So एक तो वो तरकीब होती है to play off. The other is like what you said, to maybe join one camp. अगर प्रेशर बहुत ज़्यादा बढ़ गया, फिलहाल ये जो न्यू कोल्ड वॉर है उसमें उतना प्रेशर नहीं जितना ओरिजिनल कोल्ड वॉर में था. तब द सुपर पावर्स वर इंटरवीनिंग इन द इंटरनल अफेयर्स ऑफ डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज, स्मॉल कंट्रीज, एंड ट्राइंग टू चेंज द रेजिम्स एंड ऑल दैट. अभी तक उस लेवल का वी हैव नॉट सीन fierce kind of geopolitical contestation, but maybe
you think it will happen in future?
It's possible because see, China and the US are on a collision path, and even though Trump may not have a grand vision for containing China, at least on economic aspect, he's launched a full-scale economic war on China. So I think, and the Chinese believe that the US is out to stop them from rising. जैसे हम कह रहे हैं ना कि चीन हमारे अभ्युदय में एक रास्ते का रोड़ा बना हुआ है, वैसे ही चीन समझता है कि अमेरिका रास्ते का कांटा है उनके लिए. So I think the clash and the conflict will continue. I don't think the US and China can accommodate and become friends or anything like that. But meanwhile ये खेल चलता रहेगा, and smaller countries have to be very cautious because if they make the wrong call, suddenly their internal instability and all these things may increase, and external powers can exploit the internal weakness of these smaller countries.
Very fascinating to know about different countries and how do you say it. Let's talk about you. How did you get into learning about foreign policy and what attracted you?
See, I was always a social studies buff from childhood. I am partly from Odisha and partly from Andhra. And growing up, I always loved history, civics, or what is now called political science, economics, all these things. So I used to have a natural inclination towards those. So I kept pursuing those, and then I did history, and then I switched to international relations for my master's and PhD. So I think political science is the core. I've always been one, and social science is always motivated me, and all my books are based on core social science understanding of the world. And I continue to believe that as India grows, we need a larger number of young people in this country who are part of this movement which is globally conscious. So like your podcast, I'm so happy to see that you're covering international issues at such depth, because the interest among young people has increased, especially after a G20 presidency in 2023. A lot of young people want to know what's happening in very, very far off parts of the world. Earlier, they were only bothered about just, maybe a neighboring country or US or China. Now, if there is a coup d'etat somewhere, or if there's a terrorist attack somewhere, or a military takeover in another part of the world, people follow and people think about the repercussions. So I think that global consciousness is coming, and my mission is to continue to spread that because our mainstream news media is still very domestically preoccupied. So occasionally they do foreign affairs coverage, but I think the society wants more, and I'm happy to see your kind of podcasts contributing to that cause.
You mentioned about the media gets busy, it remains busy in the internal and domestic affairs, lesser than what they should cover in the foreign affairs. Do you think storytelling is necessary in foreign policies?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, our audiences have been used to a certain dramatic kind of narratives, especially you see the vernacular news channels. They make it like a, soap opera and with music, and they're trying to. So I would say, but I would still say international affairs should be projected soberly, without excess emotion and excess drama, and but in a way which is intelligible to ordinary audiences. So, the choice of language, sometimes we in the scholars also, we are like in an ivory tower. We don't engage with the general public. Like I do a TV show on Doordarshan, Indian Diplomacy, which is for the general public. It is not for the international relations community, which is specialized and only few thousand people may be there in the whole world. But this is like trying to reach to millions of audiences to give them clarity of thought and to spur them to do their own research. So an episode of my TV show on DD, Indian Diplomacy, may be just to tickle the curiosity, and then people who may want to go further and look up and read more or watch more content should be able to do so. So I think we need to do more such things. Storytelling, and I would say presentation matter, and also simplification. Sometimes it's a complex world, and if you have no clear line of thinking, and if it's muddled up, you say, ye bhi hai, wo bhi hai, ye bhi ho sakta hai. Then, you end up putting people off, average people, lay intelligent reader or viewer, I think want some clarity and a clear opinion from whoever they are watching or listening. So I think that is required. We need bolder and more informed opinion than what we have right now. But hopefully more people take up this cause, and we will have a younger generation that is more articulate. We need many more Jaishankars.
So before going to the last segment, you mentioned about your book and your TV show on Doordarshan as well. So your book is called Friends, India's Closest Strategic Partners. And on the cover you have Israel, you have Russia, India, US, France, Japan, Palestine, talking about that.
No, that's the UAE. It's the UAE, United Arab Emirates.
Yeah. So talking about Palestine specifically, why do you see that in the Indian protests, the flags of Palestine, the flags of Israel, people wave and they demand India or the Indian administration to stand with Palestine or with the cause of Israel? Why do you see that the war that is not happening in India has nothing to do with it, but still it's happening?
I think the reason for that is people often simplistically transpose religious identities from Middle East to here, So there will be like a political faction in India that believes that, Hamas and Islamic extremism and jihadism is the real problem. And so Israel is taking forceful action, so we should support Israel. And then there are others who will look at it in terms of, Hamas and the Palestinians generally as a whole are oppressed and they are just fighting back for their dignity, and that Islam is in danger or Muslims are being suppressed. So these kind of things, and then it plays into the domestic, I would say biases. I think many people don't really understand the nature of this crisis and how it has evolved over time, but they simplistically go for this kind of division, no? You are either pro-Islam or you are against jihad. If they do it that way, or sometimes there are people who say that Jewish are more like Hindus, so therefore we all have a commonality. I would say you have to actually study that crisis. Sometimes the anti-India elements around the world, like especially in Pakistan, they equate Palestine with Kashmir,
correct,
or with Chechnya and all that, and they say all of these are Islamic minorities who are struggling for self-determination against oppressive other religious groups and all that. So I think we should not fall for that. This is not necessarily a religious conflict, and we should look at it in terms of the regional geopolitics. For example, why are some Islamic countries becoming friends with Israel and recognizing Israel? There is no answer. I mean, those who don't know it why is UAE recognized Israel? Why are the Abraham Accords happening in spite of the war? Even Saudi Arabia may recognize Israel ultimately, the home of Makkah and Medina. On the other hand, why is Iran not willing to accommodate with Israel? Why is it clashing? So I would say it's also a geopolitical clash. Where did the rockets of Hamas come from? Where did the arsenal of Hezbollah come from? It just comes from being Islamic? No, it comes from the fact that they are being backed by certain countries who oppose Israel regionally. So yes, there is a religious fundamentalism in the region. Yes, but it's not the only story. Many of these fundamentalists are supported by other players who are internally divided within the Islamic world. Sunni versus Shia, moderate versus extremist, and so on. So I would say, but for that people to understand, maybe they don't have the time or the energy, so they just go with the simplistic idea that this is a fight between Jewish people and Muslims, and we will take one side or the other.
Let's talk about the Indians in the Indian diaspora, because you are someone who, who is seeing India from different perspective and everything. So I have the last few questions. Let's say if India's relationship would fall out with US, or maybe India's relationship would fall out with some other countries, and India have a huge diaspora across every country. How do you see that India will shield its diaspora?
Some of the anti-immigration measures, for example, you've seen under Trump administration, people are saying it's a threat to the diaspora. But no, look, there are some apparently 7.5 lakh Indians who are unauthorized migrants in the US. 7.5 lakhs. That's one estimation. The legitimate Indian Americans who got citizenship or permits are 4.4 million or 4.5 million. Right? Look at where is 7.5 lakh and 4.5 million. That's 45 lakhs, So what I'm trying to say is our diaspora is pretty strong and accepted in all parts of the world wherever they are based. We have a big cluster in the Gulf countries. We have a huge one in North America, a lesser one in Europe, but a big one in the UK, and then one in Southern and Eastern Africa, and also in Southeast Asia, especially in Malaysia. So we have a large diaspora that's spread out. In most of these countries, they have become very influential. It remains an asset for us. So, in fact, they have paved the strategic partnerships we have with those countries, the diaspora. Australia, we have a large and growing diaspora. It may be close to 1 million now. So, in all these countries, I would say they are not in danger. I don't think we should exaggerate that. And if there is some kind of action against illegal immigrants, that's different, and we should not club these two. Our diaspora, most of them are second, third, fourth generation or even fifth generation who have gone and settled there, right? I think most countries appreciate it. They like the hard work, the assimilation, and the totally positive type of citizenship that our diaspora shows in those countries. We are able to have all identities. You can be Indian in your heart, but you can also be a British or a Canadian or a or a Malaysian.
So Indians are accepted across every India.
Yeah. So I think we should be assured they will remain our force multiplier in the world.
Yeah. So these are the last two questions. I want to know, what is that one global crisis that is going on under the radar, but no one is talking about it?
I think there is a big war in the Congo, in Central Africa, that has been raging for a long time. It's devastated the whole region, and there are like 10-15 countries that are actually drawn into this conflict. It just doesn't get the headlines in many parts of the world because there's no big power involved. It's all like mostly regional countries engaged in this. So this has been a running crisis. There is always a kind of a lurking crisis of what North Korea will do again with their missiles and nuclear weapons, and how, for example, President Trump will respond to it. Last time there was he said that he promised that North Korea will be annihilated, and then later on he started having the so-called love affair with Kim Jong-un. So I think that crisis, depending on what's happening in North Korea and in the region there in East Asia, it could erupt again. There are risks of war over Taiwan. It's a real risk. If the Chinese go for maximum and try to invade and take over Taiwan, how will the Americans respond? What will be the role of Japan, Australia, Quad countries, India in response? These are all big ifs, but contingencies, we must be preparing and planning for those contingencies. Our military is planning, and we do a lot of tabletop exercises in our military academies as to what will happen if there is, for example, a war in East Asia over Taiwan or South China Sea. So there are a lot of such fault lines and fissures that are widening, and it's not looking like a very cooperative era. like we discussed at the beginning, is more disorder and anarchy where rules are falling by the wayside. So I would be quite wary and cautious and in a way mentally prepared for the next big crisis. We can't just sit back and say things are okay with us, we will be affected no matter what happens in any of these war zones that I'm talking about.
Lovely. So let's end this podcast with one last question: that what should be India's top 3 diplomatic priorities over the next 5 years?
I would say manage the relationship with China without resorting to war, and I think that will be our topmost priority, because China under Xi Jinping has become very difficult for us. Obviously, the other, managing the US relationship, especially given Trump's economic warfare and all that, and trying to reach an accommodation with the US, I think that would be again. So managing the great powers, that is definitely one big aspect. 2, like you flagged, there have been some political changes in neighboring countries, so we'll want to make sure that Indian interests are not disrespected or are violated by these smaller neighbors. And 3, I would say we need to have a long-term plan for countering the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and which has become so massive that we are losing influence to China in many parts of the developing world, because we don't have the same amount of resources that the Chinese have. So as we grow as an economy, my view is our priority should be to invest more in the global south. We are already doing a lot of things for global south, but not with the same amount of financial means that the Chinese bring, because they're a smaller economy. So we need to grow fast and make sure we allocate more resources to make sure our influence stays in these countries, so that 10 years down the line, when we have become a great power, let's say, or a leading power, it should not be that we didn't do the diplomacy and suddenly the whole world we look around is Chinese, or under Chinese hegemony.
Correct.
So I think these are I would say, the long-term strategies or the priorities we should have going forward. I'm sure our External Affairs Minister and Prime Minister also think along this way. That's why they prioritize certain countries more, in their overall outreach and engagement, because they do realize that for India to grow, we need a favorable global environment. And the task of the diplomacy is to make sure there is that favorable global environment in which we can grow from 4.5 trillion to 10 to 20 to 30. Our vision 2047 is to be a 40 or 50 trillion dollar economy, that which is approximately 10 times more than what we are today.
Yeah.
How do you have such leapfrogging growth? That's why it's very important that we have key partnerships and friendships, as I highlighted in my book Friends, so that the external environment is favorable for India to keep rising.
Thank you so much, Sreeram sir, for talking in depth about everything, India's foreign policy, about the new world order and everything. I think the general audience would relate to it, and they will get to know actually what is happening and what they should be knowing. Thank you so much for joining on OD.Podcast. In every episode of OD.Podcast, we ask our guests that how was your session and how did you feel about the episode? So how was your experience?
Thank you. I like the questions, and I like the sharpness and the focus, and I believe it's of high educative value for the viewers.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us on OD.Podcast.